Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kaylee and today we are back on my island Rubble for the very last time. Today we are finally doing the finished island tour. As you know, we've been working on this island for a decent amount of time and I am so excited that it's finally finished and for you to see the final product. But before we get started on the tour, let's take a quick look at the in-game map. And here it is. Not super exciting and no crazy terraforming. You can see though that we have a bunch of little buildings scattered around the bottom of the map. But for the villagers we have Dobie, Joey, Zell, Lucky, Cousteau, Ike, Shep, Kyle, Rattle, and Avery. You'll also notice that most of the in-game buildings are on the beach, and I did do that intentionally, and for the most part they are blocked off, so you won't be seeing those during today's tour. We are going to start the tour by going down this little walkway right in front of resident services. And I did leave some presents for you when you come to visit. It's just a little outfit so you can get into character when touring the island. But continuing down this road, we do have two ways to go, but I am going to go to the left, which leads us to the abandoned fishing hut. And this is where Cousteau lives, and if you didn't know, he is my favorite villager, so of course I gave him the lake house. And apparently CJ is visiting the island today, and since this is my only source of water on the island, he's just hanging out over here. But this is the lake house, and I did keep all the house exteriors the way they came with the villagers, and I think Cousteau's house fits nicely here. Around his house, I just cluttered it up with some fishing supplies and other trash items to make it feel run down. But for this area, my idea was it used to be a big lake, and then over time, since the apocalypse, it's just been drying up and shrinking. So for that idea, I've kept this area pretty natural with a few fishing related items, but I really wanted to look like this dirt path that used to be part of the lake, and now it's just all dried up. And something I really tried to do on this island is to make it very easy to navigate, so if you stick to the path you shouldn't find yourself stuck anywhere because I did block off some certain areas, so just staying to the path is the easiest way to navigate this island. Continuing around the lake, we have a very natural and overgrown trash vibe of the island, and this leads us back to the road where we started on, and we're going to continue touring moving to the left. And right after this little intersection, we've made it over to the entrance. And this first half of the entrance is a fake building, and I think this is probably my favorite of the fake buildings that we have on this island. I love the gray and rusted retro transportation stops, and all the items on top of the building, and the items layered around I think look pretty realistic as well. But we are going to continue moving to the left, and this leads us over to the actual entrance with the airport. This area was the first build we made on this island, and I still think it's one of my favorite areas on the whole island. I think it just gets across the theme and the vibe I was going for, very run down and abandoned, but also overgrown with a bunch of trees and other nature growing in. And behind the gas station we do have Rattle's house. I will say none of the villagers' houses' interiors are decorated, they're just how they came in the game, but they are all accessible so you can still go in if you want to see their normal houses. If I was going to decorate the houses, Rattle's house would be the interior of the gas station because I always imagined him to be the owner of the gas station since he lives right next to it. But behind Rattle's house, we also have a big fake building, and you'll see this one a little bit more at the end of the island tour, but I like that you can see it from the outside of his house. And here is another view of the gas station. Continuing to the left, we have a little house overlook, and this build was actually completely inspired by this picture that I found on Pinterest. I love taking pieces of art or photographs and turning them into builds in Animal Crossing. I also love making these buildings accessible because I think it's more fun to be able to climb up and see areas from a higher point of view, and it's just a little bit more interactive rather than just walking around the island. I also try to give these little builds a small background story, like this one was a little hideout spot for a little kid, so we have a switch and a plushie to keep them company and busy during the apocalypse. And then we have this truck that was in the middle of unloading at a gas station when the apocalypse started, so there's just piles of boxes in this little area. And then this leads into a pretty large transition area with a trash-filled alleyway with another large fake building. And this is just a small alleyway, but I do love how this area turned out with all the layering of the trash items. It's pretty cluttered but still walkable, which is kind of how I wanted this whole island to feel. And this area leads us to the abandoned train tracks, which of course we had to have a full abandoned train on the tracks that is covered in graffiti. You can walk back in this area a little bit, but I did block it off at some point because my initial intentions were for you not to be able to see the end of the train tracks at all, but you will see in a minute that you can see the end, but from this angle it looks like the tracks just continue on. And then on the other side we have these two archways for the train to go under the hill, and you can see one of the villager houses up there, but we'll get a better view of that in a little bit. Continuing through this little pathway, we have another split area, and I am going to go to the right first, which leads us to the abandoned playground. We have a little patch of dirt with all of your playground essentials. So we have the jungle gym, some springy ride-on horses, and a soccer goal, and of course some snacks and beverages in the back. And I wanted to keep this area pretty simple with just some overgrown weeds and some custom codes, but this does lead us over to the end of the train tracks that you can see. And we have this pavilion with a little seating area. When I built this area, I explained that all the playgrounds I went to as a child always had these weird buildings for the bathrooms, and they were just like solid concrete with like no lights and like covered in spiders. So I just built a creepy pavilion for this playground. Again, you can see the end of the train tracks here. Sadly, due to space limitations, I couldn't block it off and still have the pavilion, but I think it works out in the end, and I love how this little playground area turned out. Alright, backtracking a bit, we are going to go to the left of this area, and this is actually the last area that was built on this island, and it's the campsite. And this build was actually a member-only video that came out this weekend, so if you're a member, make sure to check this video out. But this is just a small overgrown camping ground, and it's funny because we actually had a campsite villager the day of this dream address, so I didn't even have to use an amiibo, and I didn't get to pick out the villager. But this villager is in the top 5 favorite of mine, so comment down below who you think is chilling in this campsite. But I do like how this area turned out. I didn't have this area planned out to be a campsite area, but I felt like it fit well in this spot, and I think it's fitting to go right next to the playground for some reason. Next up, we're going to go up this incline that brings us to a little road that splits a small neighborhood from a street market, and we're going to take a look at the neighborhood first. For this area, I had initially planned a tiered neighborhood with 4 villager houses, but I somehow miscalculated how many houses we had left once I got to this area, so instead I just went with the 2 houses and then added an abandoned pool behind them that we will take a look at in a few minutes. For these house exteriors, I was looking at a bunch of pictures of abandoned houses, and I decided to go with the more natural route and just have their yards look super overgrown. And I think it's a good change of feeling when compared to the street market that's right across the street from these houses. And speaking of the street market, here we are. And this was honestly the hardest area for me when it came to decorating. I have seen so many amazing street market designs from Horrible Gaming or Kanoto, so I had plenty of inspiration. I even looked at pictures of real street markets and different types of like abandoned alleyways. But something about this area being super structured made it hard for me to design, especially since most of the builds on this island have been very overgrown and kind of organic with the use of a lot of trees and other natural items, and this build was very much the opposite of that. But basically we have this little alleyway that is between 2 of these larger buildings, and then off to the right we have a house, and this is the one that we saw from the train tracks, and this is Ike's house. In my mind, Ike is like the auto repair guy, so if you need a car, you come to Ike, and he has his little workshop area in the front of the building, and he just fixes up cars during the apocalypse. And then in the front of this area, we have another incline, and this leads to an abandoned bridge build. Again, it's not really a bridge, but this side of the building looks like a bridge to me, so that's just what I call it. And this area has a few different fake buildings spread around, including this one that we can get a good view of the bridge from. And you do have to kind of scoot over next to this cardboard box to get a good view, because at certain positions some of the arches start to disappear, which is a little bit of a bummer, but lag just means that you have a good island. For this area, my goal was to actually leave it a little empty looking, because I wanted it to feel like you're in the middle of an abandoned and trash-filled field. So unlike a lot of the different areas on this island, I actually wanted to have some open spots of grass, and I think this does help with some of the lag, because if it was as crowded as the rest of my island, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the arches didn't reappear as they do now. And there are a few spots in this area where you can wiggle yourself onto the beach, but I tried to block them off, but if you are really determined to get onto the beach for some reason, you can in this area. None of the beaches are decorated, so I would just stick with the grassy bits of the map. But that's really it for this area, so I am going to run back up to the little neighborhood area so we can continue the tour in that direction. Alright, between Dobby's and Zell's house we have this small little sidewalk, and this leads us back to the abandoned pool. This area was not one of my planned builds, so this spot was actually supposed to be part of the tiered neighborhood, but I am so glad we had a change in plans because I've been dying to do an abandoned pool build, and I love how this area turned out. And I love that this little pool is accessible. There are a few different vines for you to climb down, and I also added a ladder because I feel like most pools have those small little metal ladders on the sides. This area is a little bit tight, but for the most part you can wiggle around the sides. And then out the right side of this pool deck we get to Joey's house, and Joey is supposed to be the lifeguard, so he has his little shed next to the house where he can keep all his pool cleaning tools and other types of supplies, but again, try to keep his yard pretty overgrown and simple. And then right in front of Joey's house, we have the last incline of the island, and this leads us to a small little filler area. And I didn't actually film this because honestly, it took me about 10 minutes to build, but it's just a small little building, and this is right next to our big factory build. And then on the other side of the trees in the front of this area is where the campsite is, just in case you're trying to keep a mental note of where everything is in relation to each other. But like I said, this area is the factory, which is also my character's house. And if you step on this manhole cover, you can get a good view of the whole factory if you tilt your camera up. I love making big builds like this with the castle items. If you've seen my island Pebble, you know that the island has a few large builds like this too, and I just think they're so much fun to make. And there is a way to get to my house. Unfortunately, I did not decorate the inside of my house, so you'll basically just see an empty house, but feel free to go inside if you want. Continuing to the right side, we have another small filler area, and this is just to fill the gap between the factory and the dump, which is where we are going now. And just like the pool, this one is also fenced in, and I feel like it just gives this kind of like spooky, dangerous feeling to the area. And this build was so much fun because I got to use a lot of the items that I never really get to use, like this electric chair. When else are you going to use an electric chair? Never. And this is Shep's house. If I were to redo any of the exteriors of the villager homes, it would definitely be this one, but I honestly couldn't be bothered to do 30 houses in Happy Home Paradise, but I think Shep is perfect. He's the perfect little junkyard dog for this area. Coming out of the front of the junkyard, we are now in the cemetery. This is another build that I had a lot of fun creating. My goal for this build was to use the wheat field and make them look as natural as possible, and I love how it turned out. And it also encouraged me to use the wheat field in a lot of other areas on my island because I was very hesitant because I actually hated this item at first. But in the front of the cemetery, we have Avery's house, and I used Avery because he reminded me the most of a vulture, and his yard is just part of the overgrown graveyard. And if you follow this path up and to the left, we have Lucky's house, and of course we had to use Lucky because he's a dead dog and this is a graveyard, so it fits perfectly. And you can wiggle around and walk through some of the tall wheat field grass, but you can also just stick to the path and get around a little bit easier. Some of the gravestones and other items make it a little tricky to squeeze through in some areas. But we are now heading to the last area of the island, and we have the infected mushroom forest, which was a build inspired by the game and the new show The Last of Us. This build was so much fun to make, and I love the mush parasol item, so it gave me a good excuse to add a bunch here and sprinkle them around the rest of the island. And leaving this area, we are right back at resident services. But that's the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you for going along this journey with me. I am so excited to add a second island to my completed list. Before you leave, make sure to give the video a like, comment, and to subscribe to the channel. And if you watched to the end of the video, let me know what your favorite part of this island was. Bye, friends! Also, here is a giant shout out to all of the channel members. If you want to join the ranch, hit that join button down below.